Tom Aspinall walked into UFC 321, the kind of quiet confidence that made fans believe he belonged on the sport's largest stages. He had risen quickly, a technician with uncommon speed, a heavyweight who moved like a much lighter man, and a champion whose future looked as inevitable as it was bright. Across from him stood Ciryl Gane, the technically gifted former interim champion, a measured striker with a reputation for composure and movement. The matchup promised a clash of styles that could define the heavyweight landscape for years. No one expected the fight would end in seconds, not because of a knockout, but because of an illegal strike so severe it stripped vision from a champion and turned celebration into crisis. The exchange unfolded fast. Midway through the first round, an upraised hand met Aspinall's face, fingers splaying into both of his eyes. It was not a light graze. The contact was direct and brutal. Aspinall recoiled immediately, eyes watering, hands flying to his face, as he tried to blink the world back into focus. The referee paused. The doctor stepped into the cage. When the question, "Can you see?" was asked, the answer was chilling. Aspinall could not. The fight was stopped and ruled a no contest. What was meant to be a title-defining night for Aspinall instead became a medical emergency that would redefine the narrative of his career. Backstage, the scene was raw and immediate. Video captured Aspinall pacing and staring at his hands, disbelief and fury fighting through the fog of pain. He repeatedly asked what had happened, alternately accusing and pleading. Fighters and corners, who had come expecting fireworks, now watched a champion evacuate the cage to medical personnel. Ciryl Gane, visibly shaken by the turn of events, did not hide his remorse. On camera, he apologized repeatedly, saying he never wanted a fight to end this way and that he felt sick about what happened. The apology mattered, but to many, it did not undo the damage. The immediate medical reports were mixed. No obvious surface rupture that could be seen in a quick exam, but serious functional deficits that no camera could erase. Aspinall was taken to a hospital for detailed testing. Within days, his father, Andy Aspinall, delivered the blunt update the MMA world dreaded. Tom still could not see out of one eye and had only limited blurry vision in the other. Andy's voice, unvarnished and urgent, shook the perception that this was a routine stoppage. This was more than a temporary haze. This was a potential career-ending injury. Social media reacted in predictable, brutal fashion. Clips of the illegal contact were slowed, zoomed, and debated in every corner of MMA fandom. Some viewers called for harsh punishment. Others demanded a rematch as immediate recompense. A louder, nastier chorus also emerged, critics who accused Aspinall of quitting, questioning whether the stoppage was legitimate. Those accusations triggered one of the most painful tensions an injured athlete faces: the demand to prove pain is real in a culture that rewards stoicism and views withdrawal as weakness. Aspinall, still processing his injury, would later have to defend not just his body, but his integrity. UFC President Dana White's public comments added fuel to the conflagration. In the immediate aftermath, he called the ending a pain in the ass, a phrase that many read as dismissive of the severity of Aspinall's condition. White later clarified and publicly tried to diffuse tensions, saying he had not intended to disparage Aspinall and that any frustration was about the result and logistics, not the fighter himself. Still, the exchange illustrated a deeper fault line between fighters' medical vulnerability and the promotional machine that depends on predictable outcomes and big nights. Tom Aspinall did not stay silent for long. When he addressed fans and critics, he was blunt and raw. He recounted the immediate terror of losing sight in the cage, the panic at being unable to orient himself, and the weeks of blurry, double vision and photophobia that followed. He said he was following doctor's orders and wouldn't risk returning until cleared. He called out what he saw on replay:
a pattern late in the round where fingers were repeatedly close to his face, and accused Gane of crossing a line. Those comments only intensified debate, splitting opinion between those who saw a champion protecting his long-term health and those who labeled him fragile for withdrawing after a foul. Ciryl Gane's apology surfaced in this fraught atmosphere as more than PR. It was a human acknowledgement in a spectacle industry. Gane repeatedly said the eye pokes were accidental, described his own experience of being poked in other fights, and emphasized that he never intended to cause permanent harm. For many viewers, the admission was meaningful.
For others, it couldn't undo the damage. This is one of the worst-case scenarios in combat sports, when the sport's inherent violence collides with an outcome that has long-term, life-altering consequences for a competitor. Facebook. Medical updates trickled out, each one increasing the gravity. Tests revealed significant ocular trauma, diplopia, double vision, restricted ocular movement, photophobia, and severely reduced acuity in the injured eye. Reports from specialist consultations used language that quiets crowds. Guarded prognosis. Surgical intervention may be required. Uncertain timeline for return. Those phrases are the professional equivalents of a chilling silence in a locker room. When doctors apply them to an athlete in their physical prime, the implications are profound. Not just an absence from competition, but a potential permanent diminishment of a body part essential to the sport. The heavyweight division felt the shock almost immediately. Matchmakers who had been planning aspirational headline fights for Aspinall were forced to recalibrate. Contenders who had been building toward a showdown with the champion found the ladder removed from the wall. From a promotional standpoint, the loss of a rising star is a business problem. Fewer marquee matchups and uncertainty about ticket sales and PPV buys. From a human standpoint, it was a stark reminder that the sport's best-laid plans are fragile when the body is on the line. Public debate hardened into a culture war about fighter safety and the sport's tolerance for blunt trauma. Analysts and medical commentators began asking hard questions. Are current gloves and hand positioning rules sufficient to prevent eye gouges? Should there be heavier penalties or automatic suspensions for repeated fouls? Could gloves be redesigned to lessen the chance of fingertip penetration? These conversations were not theoretical. They followed the naked arithmetic of risk and consequence, a high-impact sport where a single illegal moment can alter a man's life forever. Amid the uproar, Dana White promised the UFC would rebook the fight. The business answered to an unresolved title picture, calling it a pain in the ass but yes when asked about a rematch. He framed the stoppage as an unfortunate logistical hiccup that could be fixed with a future date. For many fans and pundits, the promise of a rematch was a balm. Settle it inside the cage and move forward. For others, it felt premature, as if simply scheduling another event could erase the medical uncertainty still hovering over Aspinall's recovery. Tom's family became more vocal as the situation evolved. Andy Aspinall's public updates were short, factual, and emotional. He described his son's vision as still impaired and warned that the road to recovery would be long, cautioning against premature expectations. Fathers often speak blunt truths. In this case, Andy's restraint and visible worry signaled to fans that the situation was indeed dire and required patience over spectacle. That paternal protection underscored the human cost behind the headlines and Twitter takes. The medical drama also forced a closer look at precedent. Other fighters who returned to elite competition after ocular injuries did so with varying degrees of success. Some managed long careers, others faded into diminished effectiveness. Doctors and rehabilitation specialists began discussing the unique challenges of ocular recovery, scar tissue around the eye muscles, retinal vulnerability, and the unpredictable timelines for the restoration of binocular vision. Those technical, clinical details do not play well in highlight reels, but they define whether a fighter can safely return to a sport
that demands split-second visual processing. As weeks turned into months, Aspinall's updates shifted from anger to guarded realism. He acknowledged his frustration, recognized the outpouring of support, and repeatedly stated he would only return when fully cleared. That stance earned him respect among many peers who understood the calculus. Fighting on compromised vision invites catastrophic consequences not just for the individual, but for opponents and officials. His insistence on medical clearance reframed the conversation around responsibility. Who, ultimately, decides when a fighter is ready to step back into harm's way? The UFC, for its part, navigated a narrow path. The company publicly committed to rematch plans and expressed concern for Aspinall's welfare, but it also had to manage a stacked schedule and the business imperative of keeping interest high in the heavyweight division. Promoters face a tightrope when a marquee athlete is sidelined. Replace the storyline and ride a new wave, or wait for the star's potential return and risk momentum loss. The UFC tried to strike both balances, promise a rematch while continuing to promote alternative main events to satisfy a global audience.
Polarized. Many rallied behind Aspinall, sending messages of support and demanding stricter enforcement of fouls. Others continued to question the stoppage, replaying footage to judge intent and severity. Social media amplified every angle, turning medical nuance into moral certainty in 280 characters or less. That environment can be unforgiving for injured athletes, who must recover physically while also defending their reputation in a public square that loves decisive narratives. The debate reached pundits and medical professionals who weighed in with measured perspectives. Some called for rule changes that would make repeated finger-first contact more penalized. Others suggested immediate avenues for improved protective measures. Joe Rogan, physicians, and veteran fighters pointed to the reality that although accidental fouls occur, the governing bodies and promotions have the power to shift incentives and enforcement to mitigate the risk. Those conversations, while slow to change policy, signaled a potential turning point in how the sport approaches avoidable ocular harm. Ciryl Gane continued to express remorse publicly. He emphasized remorse was not an admission of malice and that accidental fouls can occur, especially in high-tempo exchanges among heavyweights. His tone was contrite, and he repeatedly asked for Aspinall's recovery to be prioritized over speculation. Whether fans accepted his apologies varied widely. For some, the sincerity mattered. For others, already convinced of wrongdoing, words were insufficient without the clarity of intent or disciplinary action. As more clinical details emerged, the possibility of surgery was discussed openly. Aspinall's team consulted specialists, and he reportedly underwent further diagnostic imaging to clarify the extent of structural damage. Surgery for ocular trauma is specialized and comes with its own set of risks and recovery variables. Conversations about surgical options were careful and cautious, framed around preserving as much function as possible and minimizing the risk of further loss. The long arc of recovery is rarely linear. There are days of progress, setbacks, and the psychological toll of uncertainty. For a fighter whose identity is tightly bound to physical dominance, the prospect of indefinite inactivity is a form of exile. Aspinall's glimpses to fans, clipped training walks, statements about following medical orders, and measured replies to critics suggested a man learning patience without surrender. That composure, however tentative, hinted at the deeper resilience required for whatever came next: rehabilitation, a possible return, or the wrenching decision to walk away.
The ripple effects reach beyond Aspinall himself. Athletic commissions, matchmakers, and fighter unions, where they exist, began to revisit enforcement in penalties for eye pokes. Clinical communities pushed for clearer post-foul protocols, mandatory specialist evaluations, and better data collection on ocular outcomes in combat sports. Those systemic conversations often lag behind headline cycles, but the Aspinall incident created renewed urgency. When a title fight ends with a no contest due to an eye poke and the champion faces uncertain vision, the incentives to act sharpen. For the heavyweight division, the immediate future grew murky. A promised rematch with Gane was on the books rhetorically, but without a medical timeline, the bout could not be formally scheduled. Interim planning became the operational default, which contenders could maintain momentum, who could fill main events, and how to keep fans engaged without the champion in the picture. That uncertainty changes how fighters train, agents negotiate, and how the sport markets its stars. In the quiet moments away from cameras, Tom's personal life took on greater weight. Family, friends, and medical staff became the anchors. The octagon receded from daily conversation. The champion, who once measured success in finishes and breakneck progress, now measured time in appointments, eye charts, and small functional victories, a reduction that is at once humbling and brutally human. For fans used to the spectacle, these private moments are easy to overlook. For the fighter and his family, they become the struggle that will define whether the story ends in comeback or concession. No one can say with certainty what will happen next. Medical teams continue to assess, specialists continue to opine, and the UFC continues to juggle promotional realities with the imperative of fighter safety. What is clear is that Aspinall's story has already altered conversations about risk, enforcement, and how the sport treats its injured athletes. The incident has become a case study in the cost of a single illegal moment in a sport built on legal violence. If Aspinall returns, it will be because surgeons, doctors, and his team are satisfied that the odds of safe competition have been restored. If he does not, then the sport will have been robbed of one of its most promising champions by an act that, while perhaps accidental, had consequences no one imagined when the fighters first touched gloves. Either outcome will leave a legacy, one of resilience and recovery, or one of cautionary loss. For now, the world watches and waits. The rematch is promised, but not scheduled. The medical reports are being updated, but with measured optimism. Tom Aspinall's voice, when it appears, is careful and deliberate. He speaks not as a man seeking sympathy, but as one confronting a new reality. The heavyweight division may rebuild around someone else, or it may wait for a champion to reclaim his throne. Either way, the night at UFC 321 will be remembered not for a knockout reel, but for the fragile line it revealed between sport and life, and the heavy cost when that line is crossed.